Ethan's spaceship shuddered violently as it passed through the dense asteroid field. Red lights flashed across the control panel, and alarms screamed in the small cabin. He gritted his teeth and fought the controls, trying to stabilize the ship. His destination had been a routine supply route between two human colonies, but a miscalculation in the asteroid trajectory had sent him spiraling off course. The instruments warned of a nearby planet, one not marked on most star charts. Desperate to survive, Ethan guided the ship toward it. Thick clouds covered its surface, glowing faintly green under the light of a distant sun. His ship broke through the atmosphere with a deafening roar, skidding across jagged mountains and strange forests below. Finally, the engines gave a low, defeated whine. The ship crashed, sending up a plume of dust and smoke. Ethan coughed, his vision blurred by smoke and sparks. He struggled out of the cockpit, coughing and hacking, but alive. Around him, the air was heavy but breathable, tinged with the scent of alien flora. Towering trees with pale blue leaves stretched toward the sky, and strange birds with silver feathers darted through the branches. He took a deep breath and tried to calm his racing heart. As he examined the area, he noticed something unexpected. Structures. Not human, not natural. Buildings carved from a smooth, stone-like material, shaped like tall cones and spirals. It looked ancient but well-maintained. Ethan's mind raced. Who, or what, lived here? Movement caught his eye. From behind a cluster of the blue-leaf trees, a figure appeared. A woman, but unlike any he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly gold in the sunlight, and her hair was long and white, flowing almost like liquid silver. She watched him, carefully, unafraid yet cautious. Her eyes were large and bright, almost too perfect, and they studied him with curiosity. Ethan raised his hands slowly, a universal sign of peace. He tried to speak. "Hello, but stopped. He realized she probably wouldn't understand his language. Instead, he gestured toward himself, then to the ship, hoping to show he meant no harm. The woman tilted her head, silent, her gaze unwavering. Slowly, more figures emerged. They were all women, each with subtle differences in skin tone and hair, but all shared the same elegance and grace. They formed a semicircle, silent and still, their eyes fixed on him. Ethan swallowed nervously. "Okay. This is new," he muttered to himself. "Not exactly what I expected from a crash landing." He stepped forward carefully, keeping his hands visible. The women didn't move toward him, but they didn't retreat either. The tallest of them, with a braid of shimmering white hair, finally spoke. But not in words he understood. The sounds were soft, melodic, but foreign, almost like a song. Ethan's brow furrowed as he tried to mimic them. His attempt sounded harsh in comparison, and the women flinched slightly at the sound. One of them, the one who had first approached, finally stepped closer. She held out her hand, not threatening but curious. Ethan hesitated, then lowered himself to show respect. Slowly, their hands met, and the touch was strange yet gentle. The woman's skin was warm, soft and strong all at once. Ethan could feel the subtle pulse of life, the steady rhythm of someone who had survived alone for a long time. He realized then that these women had lived without men for a long time. Very long. He had read stories of planets like this, but never imagined he would meet one. "How long?" he whispered, unsure if she could answer. She simply tilted her head again, her eyes wide, almost as if measuring him. Ethan studied the colony from a distance. The structures were tall and elegant, connected by bridges made of the same smooth stone. Strange glowing plants lit pathways, but there was no sign of machinery. The women seemed to work together seamlessly, carrying baskets of food and tending gardens of alien fruits. It was clear their society was built on cooperation and order. As he wandered cautiously, trying not to intrude, Ethan realized that he needed shelter and supplies. His ship was damaged beyond repair, and he had little food. He approached the women again, signaling his need for water and rest. This time, One of the younger women, with soft lavender-colored skin and hair that shone like gold, pointed toward a large spiral building. Ethan nodded gratefully, hoping she understood his need. Inside, the building was surprisingly large. Soft light filled the space, and the air smelled of herbs and clean water. The women moved around him, observing quietly, but letting him breathe. Ethan set down his small backpack and looked around. He had survived the crash, yes, but now he faced something entirely new. He was alone, not in the universe, but alone among a society that had never seen a man in over a century. Lyra, the first woman who approached him, finally spoke again. This time, her tone was slightly gentler. She pointed toward a small bowl, filled with liquid, then toward him. Ethan understood. Water. He knelt and drank carefully, grateful. The women watched, silent, but attentive. Hours passed, and Ethan tried to rest. He thought about his journey, the ship, the unknown planet, and the women who observed him. Their eyes, so full of curiosity and intelligence, made him feel like he had stepped into a storybook world. As night fell, the sky of the planet turned deep violet, streaked with pink and silver. Strange stars blinked overhead, different from the constellations he knew. The women gathered around a central fire, soft hums filling the air, a ritual he couldn't yet understand. Ethan watched, fascinated, realizing that he had entered a world untouched by humans for generations. And yet, despite the fear and uncertainty, a spark of hope flickered inside him. He had survived the crash, he had found shelter, and he had made contact with beings who had lived without men for 105 years. Somewhere in that realization, he sensed a story beginning, a story of trust, learning, and perhaps something more profound. Lyra's gaze met his one last time before she stood and returned to the circle of women. Her expression was unreadable, but not unfriendly. Ethan knew one thing clearly. Nothing would ever be the same, for him or for the women of this planet. The first night on the forgotten planet was silent, except for the soft hum of alien voices and the strange rhythm of a world that had waited for a man for more than a century. The next morning, Ethan woke to the soft golden light of the alien sun spilling through the spiral windows. He sat up carefully, feeling the aches from the crash in every muscle. He looked around. The women were already awake, moving gracefully through their routines, tending plants, arranging food, and performing tasks he could not yet name. They seemed calm and organized, as if life on the planet had taught them efficiency beyond human understanding. Lyra approached him first, her long white hair glinting in the morning light. She held a small tray with food, fruits and grains Ethan had never seen. The colors were vivid, blue, purple and green, glowing faintly as though lit from within. She placed the tray before him without speaking, her large golden eyes fixed on his reaction. Ethan nodded gratefully and tasted the food. The flavors were unfamiliar but pleasant, sweet with a hint of spice. He realized he needed to understand their world if he wanted to survive here. He had survived countless challenges in deep space, but this was different. This was not just survival. It was learning, connecting, and respecting a society completely foreign to him. Lyra gestured for him to follow. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then rose, brushing the dust from his clothes. Outside, the colony stretched before him. The spiral buildings were connected by bridges and walkways, and gardens filled with alien plants lined the paths. Strange creatures, small and winged, flitted among the trees, feeding on bright flowers. The women moved without words, carrying baskets, working in pairs, or tending the plants. Ethan tried to observe quietly. He noted their patterns, the way they worked together, communicated through gestures, and maintained their structures. It was a society built on precision, harmony, and discipline. Lyra led him to a larger building, at the edge of the colony. Inside, the space was filled with strange tools and devices. Ethan could see that the women had developed technology suited to their needs, but it was different from anything he had seen. There were no engines, no fuel, no mechanical machines. Everything relied on energy drawn from the sun or the plants themselves. He tried to speak again, attempting simple words. I help you? His pronunciation was awkward, but the meaning was clear. The women paused, exchanging glances, then slowly nodded. One of them took a basket of fruits and gestured for Ethan to carry it. At first, he fumbled. The fruits were heavier than he expected, and the basket's handles were delicate. The women watched silently, their eyes sharp and attentive. Slowly, he learned how to carry it without spilling. Lyra smiled faintly, a subtle expression but enough to encourage him. As the day passed, Ethan learned more about their society. The women had developed unique ways to survive on this planet. They built homes that blended with the environment, cultivated food that grew in unusual soil, and even tamed small creatures to assist in work. There were no men, yet their society thrived. They relied on cooperation, intelligence, and careful planning. But Ethan noticed something else. Subtle tension. Some women avoided him completely, keeping their distance and watching with wary eyes. They had lived without men for generations. A stranger, especially a man, was a disruption they were not prepared for. Their fear was not hostility, it was caution. Understood this. He could not force acceptance. The sun rose over the alien landscape, painting the forests and spiral buildings in shades of pink and gold. Ethan stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from yesterday's work. He had learned a lot about the women's society, their plants and their tools, but he knew trust could not be earned through observation alone. He needed to prove himself. As he stepped outside, he noticed Lyra standing at the edge of the central plaza, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. Following her line of sight, Ethan saw dark clouds rolling toward the colony. The wind picked up, carrying a strange metallic scent. Something was coming. Lyra's expression was tense. She gestured for him to follow, her pace quickening. Ethan ran beside her, trying to keep up. They reached the gardens just as the first raindrops fell. Not ordinary rain, but a heavy, almost corrosive mist that made the leaves of the plants shimmer and twist under its touch. The women were already reacting. Some formed small groups to protect the younger plants while others tried to shield the structures. Ethan quickly realized this was no ordinary storm. If it continued, the colony's carefully balanced ecosystem could be destroyed. He needed to act, and fast. "Lyra," he shouted over the wind, "what can I do?" She pointed to the tall spiral buildings and then to the smaller gardens. Ethan nodded. He understood. He would help protect both the structures and the plants. He ran to the nearest building, gathering loose panels and stones to reinforce the walls. The wind howled, tearing at his clothes and hair, but he worked steadily, using his human strength where the women could not. One of the older women approached, shaking her head. She pointed at a small group of delicate blue plants, almost crying. Ethan picked them up carefully, holding them close to protect them from the harsh mist. Lyra moved beside him, showing him a way to cover the plants with large leaves that acted like shields. Together they worked quickly, saving several sections of the garden before the storm intensified. Despite their efficiency, the storm was relentless. Ethan noticed a small bridge connecting two buildings beginning to collapse under the weight of the wind. Without thinking, he ran toward it, climbing carefully to secure the structure with ropes and stone weights. The women watched in awe as he balanced himself, steadying the bridge with human ingenuity. By mid-afternoon, the storm began to subside. The plants were battered, but most had survived. Some of the structures showed damage, but nothing beyond repair. Ethan looked around, exhausted but proud. The women gathered, their expressions a mixture of relief and curiosity. Lyra stepped forward, her golden eyes meeting his. For the first time, she smiled, a faint, genuine expression. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest. He had proven that he could be more than a stranger, that he could protect the colony when it was in danger. The older woman who had initially doubted him approached cautiously. She placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture of respect in their culture. It was subtle, but it meant something profound. He had earned a measure of trust. That evening, the women gathered in the central plaza, repairing damaged structures and replanting what the storm had destroyed. Ethan helped wherever he could, lifting stones, arranging plants, and offering advice when needed. He noticed that the skeptical women were no longer distant. They observed him closely, but without fear. He was beginning to belong, slowly but surely. After the work was done, Ethan and Lyra walked to the edge of the colony. The sky was clear now, stars twinkling in patterns unfamiliar to him. Lyra gestured toward the horizon, then to the stars as if explaining the night sky. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of his responsibility. He was not just a visitor here. He was becoming a part of their world. As they returned, Ethan noticed small groups of women speaking softly, casting glances in his direction. He realized that news of his actions had spread. The colony, which had thrived without men for over a century, was beginning to accept the idea that perhaps a man could contribute without threatening their way of life. Lyra led him to a quiet corner of the plaza. She pointed toward his hands, then to herself, and finally to the damaged plants they had saved. Ethan understood. She was acknowledging his efforts and the bond they had formed during the storm. He smiled, feeling a connection that went beyond words, beyond language. It was trust, respect, and something more subtle, something he could not yet name. That night, the women held a small gathering. They sang soft, melodic hums around a central fire, celebrating the survival of their colony. Ethan sat quietly, observing, but feeling included. For the first time since his arrival, he sensed that he was no longer just an outsider. He was a helper, a participant, a part of this society's ongoing story. Lyra sat beside him, her hand brushing lightly against his. Ethan felt a strange comfort in her presence. He realized that this planet, this colony of women, was teaching him lessons beyond survival. It was teaching him patience, humility, and the importance of trust. As the fire crackled, Ethan thought about the days ahead. There would be challenges, of course, storms, disagreements, misunderstandings, but he now knew that he could face them. The women had accepted him enough to allow him to help, and that was the first step toward true integration. Ethan lay back on the soft ground, gazing at the stars. He thought of Earth, of the vast distances he had traveled, and of the unexpected detour that had brought him here. A planet untouched by men for 105 years and yet alive with culture, intelligence, and resilience. He smiled faintly, knowing that the journey ahead would be as extraordinary as the place he had found himself in. Tomorrow, he would continue learning, continue helping, and continue building trust. And perhaps, he thought quietly, this colony would come to see him not as an outsider but as an ally, and maybe even as a friend. The night was silent, peaceful, and full of possibilities. Ethan had survived the storm, but more importantly, he had survived the trial of trust. And for the first time, he felt that he was truly part of something larger than himself, a society that had waited a century for a new presence and had, now, tentatively, welcomed him. The morning sun bathed the colony in soft gold as Ethan woke to a gentle hum. The women were already at work, moving through the gardens and buildings with practiced precision. After yesterday's storm, the colony had recovered quickly, a testament to their skill and resilience. Ethan stretched, feeling stronger now after days of labor and learning. He had begun to understand the rhythms of their society. Lyra appeared. First, her long white hair shimmering under the sunlight. She gestured toward the garden and then to the small basket of alien fruits. Ethan understood immediately. Breakfast, but also a lesson. Today, Lyra planned to show him more than survival. She would teach him the culture and knowledge that had kept the colony thriving for over a century. As they walked through the gardens, Lyra pointed to each plant, humming softly while touching the leaves. Ethan watched carefully. Some plants responded to her touch, shifting colors or releasing a faint scent. She smiled when he imitated her, adjusting his hands to match hers. Slowly, Ethan began to understand. The colony had developed a bond with the land, a way to communicate and nurture without words. "You teach?" Ethan asked hesitantly, pointing to a large spiral building nearby, a place that seemed to hold devices and tools unlike the gardens. Lyra nodded and led him inside. The building was filled with fascinating instruments, strange panels that glowed softly, containers of liquids with shifting colors, and tools designed for work that Ethan had never imagined. She gestured for him to try, guiding his hands to manipulate a few of the simpler devices. Ethan experimented carefully, following her instructions. The women observed, some quietly critical, others curious. He realized that their technology was not mechanical in the way he knew. It relied on energy from the plants, the sun, and the balance of the environment. It was elegant, efficient, and deeply connected to life on the planet. "You show?" Ethan asked, pointing toward some of his own tools, small devices from his ship, simple mechanical gadgets. He demonstrated how they worked, lifting small panels, turning dials, and generating tiny energy flows. The women leaned in, fascinated. Some reached out, mimicking his movements, trying to understand the human methods. By midday, the lessons had become a true exchange. Ethan taught the women to repair broken panels and handle small devices with precision, while Lyra showed him ways to interact with plants and materials he had never seen before. It was slow and methodical, but both sides were learning. Ethan realized that this cultural exchange was as important as physical survival. It built trust, understanding, and mutual respect. During a break, Ethan asked Lyra about their society. She led him to a quiet space, a small courtyard where plants and water flowed together in harmony. She gestured toward the buildings, then to herself, and finally toward Ethan. He nodded, understanding her meaning. Their society had thrived without men for over a century, and now he was a part of it, but he had to respect their ways and learn from them. Lyra then showed him something more personal. A small chamber decorated with intricate carvings and paintings told the history of the colony. Women had arrived long ago, adapting to life without men. They had built homes, cultivated food, and created a culture of intelligence, art, and survival. Ethan studied the murals, realizing the depth of their achievement. This was Narisak. The morning sun rose slowly over the colony, casting long shadows across the gardens and spiral buildings. Ethan stood outside, taking in the familiar sights, the glowing plants, the flowing water channels, and the women moving gracefully through their routines. Life seemed peaceful, but today a new tension hung in the air. A signal had reached him during the night, faint but clear through the small communicator he had salvaged from his ship. Another human vessel was approaching the planet. Rescue was possible. Contact with Earth was within reach. But the thought brought a heavy weight. He knew the arrival of more humans could disrupt the delicate balance the women had maintained for over a century. Lyra appeared silently beside him, sensing his unease. She did not speak, but her eyes reflected concern. Ethan gestured toward the horizon, where tiny dots of light marked the approaching ship. He explained, using simple words and gestures, that help was near, but that their arrival might bring changes the colony was not ready for. Lyra's expression hardened slightly. She looked toward the other women, then back at him. Ethan realized that some of them feared the humans. They had built a life here, independent and strong, and the thought of outsiders entering their world brought anxiety. Other women, however, watched with curiosity, as if imagining new possibilities that humans could bring. Ethan understood the dilemma. Leaving the planet could ensure the colony remained untouched, but it would mean abandoning his chance to return home. Staying could bring help and knowledge, but at the risk of altering the women's society forever. He walked through the colony, observing reactions. Some women avoided him, their gestures tense and cautious. Others approached, smiling faintly, offering small tasks or guidance. Lyra stayed close, guiding him through the tension without words. Her presence reminded him that he was not alone in this decision. He shared it with the colony now, whether they understood fully or not. Later, Ethan met with the older women who had begun to trust him. They spoke in their melodic language, and Lyra translated as best she could. They conveyed the same message: the colony was resilient and capable, but the introduction of humans could be dangerous. Ethan nodded, understanding the gravity of their perspective. That evening he stood at the edge of the colony, gazing at the stars and the approaching lights. The humans were coming, and soon. He thought of Earth, of his family, and of the mission he had been on before the crash. Yet he also thought of the colony, of the women who had welcomed him cautiously, taught him their ways, and trusted him to protect them. The choice was not easy. Lyra joined him quietly, standing beside him as they watched the approaching ship. She placed a hand lightly on his arm, a gesture of support. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest, a mixture of gratitude and responsibility. He realized that this decision was not just his. It affected every woman in the colony, every life that had survived here for 105 years without male presence. He made a choice. Ethan would stay, but in a careful, controlled way. He would allow the humans to communicate and observe, but not interfere directly. The colony's independence would be protected. Any contact would be limited and guided by mutual consent, ensuring that their way of life remained intact while allowing new knowledge to be shared. The decision brought relief and tension alike. Some women nodded subtly, accepting his plan. Others remained wary, uncertain whether humans could truly respect their society. Lyra squeezed his arm gently, signaling her approval and trust. Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would act not as a conqueror or outsider, but as a bridge between worlds. That night, the colony held a small gathering. The fire burned softly in the central plaza, casting warm light over the women and Ethan. Their hums filled the air, melodic and soothing, but there was an underlying note of concern. Ethan joined the circle, listening and observing, feeling the weight of responsibility. He could not undo the past, nor could he predict the future, but he could influence it with care and respect. Lyra sat beside him once more, her gaze steady and calm. Ethan felt a bond forming, strong, unspoken, built on shared experiences and trust earned through action. He realized that this connection was part of his duty as well. The colony's survival was not just about protecting plants or structures. It was about nurturing relationships, understanding needs, and acting with integrity. The approaching ship became visible through the night sky, a faint silhouette against the stars. Ethan noted the small distance, calculating how long it would take to arrive. He knew he must prepare for their landing, ensuring the humans would follow his instructions and not disrupt the colony's life. He turned to Lyra and made a simple gesture, pointing toward the ship and then to the colony. She understood immediately, nodding in silent agreement. Together they would guide the human visitors, allowing the colony to remain safe while opening a door to knowledge and connection. As the night deepened, Ethan lay under the alien stars, reflecting on the day's events. The storm of choices, the storm of trust, and the storm of responsibility weighed on him, yet he felt grounded. The colony had survived centuries alone. With careful planning, it could survive contact with humans too. Tomorrow, he would begin preparations for the newcomers, working with Lyra and the other women to ensure the balance was maintained. He understood that every action would have consequences, but he felt ready. Trust had been earned, bonds had been formed, and a careful plan could guide the future of the colony. For the first time, Ethan felt a true connection to this alien world. He was no longer just a visitor, no longer a stranded human alone on a strange planet. He was part of a story larger than himself, a story of trust, responsibility, and the delicate balance between worlds. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, beneath the stars that had watched the colony for centuries, Ethan knew that the next chapter of life on this planet was about to begin. Carefully, thoughtfully, and together. The first light of morning spilled across the colony, golden and warm. Ethan stood at the edge of the central plaza, looking out over the garden, spiral buildings, and glowing plants. The approaching human ship was still visible in the sky, but today, it felt less threatening. Today, he had a plan. Over the past days, Ethan had worked closely with Lyra and the other women to prepare the colony for controlled contact. He had taught them ways to communicate clearly with humans, methods to protect their environment, and ways to maintain their independence. The colony had survived without men for 105 years, and now it would survive contact with humans too, safely and on its own terms. Lyra approached, her long white hair glinting in the morning light. She smiled faintly, the same expression she had first given him after the storm. Today it was more than a smile. It was trust, approval, and understanding. Ethan nodded in return, grateful for her support. Together they would face what came next. The humans' landing was gentle and controlled. Small pods descended from the ship, guided by Ethan's instructions, and touched down at the edge of the colony. The women watched cautiously, some tense, others curious. Ethan stepped forward first, signaling peace, and the human team followed quietly, respecting the plan he had set in place. Ethan led the visitors through the colony, explaining the rules and boundaries. He showed them the gardens, the spiral, buildings, and the systems the women had developed to survive. The humans observed carefully, taking notes, asking questions, but never interfering. The colony remained intact, thriving and undisturbed. The women began to warm to the presence of other humans, seeing that Ethan's guidance ensured their safety. They taught the newcomers their methods, their rituals, and their ways of life. Ethan watched, feeling pride. He had not only survived on this planet, but had helped protect and enhance a civilization that had thrived without men for more than a century. After the humans settled at the edge of the colony, Ethan returned to the central plaza with Lyra. The women had gathered, humming their melodic songs. This time, however, there was a new layer to their harmony, a cautious curiosity toward the human visitors. The colony had changed, yes, but it had done so on its own terms, guided by trust and cooperation. Lyra stood beside Ethan, her hand brushing lightly against his. He felt a warmth in her presence, a bond that had grown steadily since his arrival. She gestured toward him, then to herself, and finally toward the colony. Ethan understood immediately. She was acknowledging his role, his respect, and the future he had helped create. Ethan spent the following days teaching, observing, and learning. He shared small technologies from Earth, ways to conserve energy and water, and simple tools to make life easier without harming the ecosystem. The women adapted quickly, blending his knowledge with their own. Together, they created a sustainable system, stronger than either could have built alone. One evening, as the twin moons of the planet rose in the sky, Ethan and Lyra walked to the edge of the forest. The air was cool, filled with the scent of alien plants and the soft hum of distant creatures. They stopped at a small clearing, overlooking the colony below. Lyra turned to him, her golden eyes calm and steady. She raised her hand, pointing toward the colony, then to Ethan, and finally, to herself. It was a simple gesture, but its meaning was clear. She trusted him completely, accepted him as part of their world, and welcomed the future they would face together. Ethan smiled,